What's up, everyone? It's Brian here from the Exact IT Solutions YouTube channel, and welcome to another video where we educate you on the things that are going on out there in the world around cybersecurity and what you can do to better protect yourself. So today we're going to talk about something that's going to be coming up in the very near future. It's probably going to be, at least in the tech circles, very big news. It might even make it into mainstream type of news because of the impact and the amount of devices and issues that this is going to cause here in the very near future if we don't act. And this video is going to educate you on what the heck I'm talking about and what you need to do and why this is such a big concern. And what I'm talking about here is called name wreck. And that's the name that's been given to this set of vulnerabilities that have been discovered on millions of devices around the world. And we're going to get into it right now. But before we do, remember, we don't get paid for this channel. The only thing that we ask of you is that you hit the like button and that you consider subscribing to our channel. If in any way, shape, or form you're entertained, enlightened, educated, or what have you, if something positive has come to your life as a result of my videos, just hit the like button and hit subscribe. So without further ado, let's jump into what the heck this name wreck is and what it's all about. All right, so this report was put out by Forescout, cybersecurity company, and they are a cybersecurity research lab. And they've dubbed this name wreck, and it's basically being named that because of DNS is how servers basically translate numbers to names. So Google.com has an IP address or multiple IP addresses behind it that are assigned to servers, and every server, every computer is assigned an IP address. You can think of an IP address like your home address. Like everybody has a unique home address, and IP addresses are just a set of numbers, identifiers that allow computers to have addresses, so we know where to send network traffic and packets from point A to point B. We need to know the address that it's coming from and the address that it's going to, and that's kind of how it works in a nutshell at a very high level. And what the folks over at Forescout did is they have discovered a series of vulnerabilities in what's known as the TCP/IP stack. And this is just networking technology. I'm not going to get into great detail about what it is because it's really technical stuff. And if you're not a technical person, that wouldn't interest you in any way. But you can go look at this report. I will link it down below in the description, and you can get all nerdy and geeky as you want to learn about all the nitty-gritty details. I'm not going to get very technical today. I'm just going to talk about this at a very high level and explain the impact and the difficulty of what has been found here and why this is going to be such a problem. So moving into the report, these particular series of threats. Now there's a number of threats that have been detected by these guys in multiple devices in basically the firmware. And when I say firmware, think of firmware like the operating system in your devices. So your computer has Windows or Mac, whatever you use, and that's your operating system. And all of the devices that you use, cameras, LED lights, all the things in your home like that are smart devices, your TVs, these all use operating systems as well, and they boot up when you turn the device on or when you power it up. Every single one of these devices has some level of firmware in it, and typically that's from a technology person's standpoint, that is the operating system of that device. So when you hear the name firmware, that's basically the Windows or the operating system for that device. the big problem with things like mobile phones, consumer electronics, office and business automation, retail automation devices, all this stuff is typically deployed and then never updated or never looked after or never maintained. And that's where the problem comes in. You have a combination of multiple devices that are out there, many, many millions of devices that are out there that are not being updated by IT people or the people that own them, combined with the fact that manufacturers are now using these older or vulnerable firmwares in their current devices that they're putting out in the market today. So the combination of the fact that we're not maintaining, plus we're deploying devices today, brand new, with these vulnerabilities, is making this a major problem. The other thing that this report points out, and that we see all the time in our business, is that things currently, for a lot of devices, especially these types of devices, computers, not so much. We've built enough tools over the years where we can manage those centrally. But the problem is that a lot of these devices that have these vulnerabilities cannot be managed centrally. And I'll get into that a little bit later and the problems that that presents. But I want you to at least have that context that a lot of these devices, there isn't one place that a engineer or a consultant can go to manage them and look at all of them. So basically it means that they have to physically go to the device, or they have to remote into each device individually, and there's no way to kind of mass deploy updates and firmware to protect these devices from what has been discovered here. So jumping into a couple things in the article. First off, number one, the three things that you need to be completely focused on with what is actually affected here are the three vulnerabilities exist in what's known as Nucleus Net TCP, FreeBSD, which is a very, very popular operating system or firmware. It runs on a lot of things, like a lot of devices, switches, firewalls, and there's also NetX. NetX is also something that has been discovered that is vulnerable. Now, the combination of these three technologies combined puts us well over 1 million devices currently exposed to the internet that are running these things. Like FreeBSD is very, very popular. It's in a lot of products, and that alone makes this a very, very concerning security issue that could be coming down the pike in the near future. Possibly the same or bigger than what we saw with SolarWinds and the Microsoft Exchange. So it's really, you have to understand how many devices are out there with FreeBSD, and I can show you that. And this is exactly what hackers would do, guys. They would come to a tool like Shodan and they would type in FreeBSD to find out who the hell has FreeBSD and see if they have these vulnerabilities, which probably do exist because they're probably not patched yet. Because while there are ways to patch this, a lot of the firmware and a lot of the people that built these devices don't have the update available yet. So in the meantime, we're dealing with basically a 0 day where the hackers can use the time between when the vulnerability is exposed to when it's actually patched. And as we've seen with other things like this, it takes a very, very long time to get these patches deployed and get these devices secured. And we also know that there's going to be a percentage of the population that just doesn't pay attention to this stuff, doesn't do this stuff, and these devices will remain vulnerable for a very long time. But we're also seeing, in the same token, along with that same thought, we're also seeing a lot of devices out there that are running very, very old unsupported firmware that contain these vulnerabilities, and there's no patch coming for those devices. So that's very concerning as a security person to know that we have all these devices out here that could be potentially hacked through these vulnerabilities, and there's no chance in the world that these devices are ever going to become secure or not be vulnerable, because nobody's going to patch them. And you can't patch these things yourself. You need the manufacturer to create the firmware for the device, and hopefully it has that vulnerabilities are patched in that new firmware, and then they deliver it to your device, or you go and download it and apply it to your device. So that's the reality. And one of the things that I've noticed in the report is that, like, there's something called VxWorks, right? And VxWorks, if that version, there's two versions that we know have these vulnerabilities, right? So a simple search on Shodan for VxWorks 5.4.2 shows us that we have 4,374 VxWorks devices on the internet exposed that we know have this vulnerability. And we could start then trying to exploit the TCP IP stack and get into these devices and get control of the network. And there's right here, as you can see, worldwide, there's 4,374 devices. That's VxWorks 5.42. VxWorks 5.51 also has the vulnerability. There's about 1,200 of those devices exposed to the internet around the world right now. So that's another thing. And again, I'm using Shodan. I just typed in VxWorks in the version, and I was able to find all the devices that Shodan knows about on the internet, and that's 1,200 devices that I could start exploiting today, or trying to exploit, using the information that Forescout has put forward in this report, assuming that these have not been patched yet, and version 5.5.1 and 5.42 have not been patched. So if security operators are intend to patch the vulnerable IoT devices running the Nucleus Net or NetX based firmware, the situation becomes more complex. And I highlighted this in our video here, and I'm bringing it up in page 24 of the report from Forescout. And basically, it's what I mentioned. The user, and sometimes even the device vendor, is unsure of what TCP IP stack runs on the device, which means that identifying vulnerabilities of vulnerable devices and issuing patches takes longer. And even when security patches trickle down from the stack vendor to the firmware of the device, it is more difficult for the user to apply those patches because the devices are not centrally managed. So the patches must be manually applied to each device, and sometimes they cannot be taken offline due to their mission critical nature, such as medical devices or industrial control systems. So these are the devices that run all this stuff. And like, we're talking about medical devices, we're talking about industrial control systems like HVAC systems and door access and control systems and security systems and facilities management systems. The report even goes on further to say, actually it's probably down here, I believe, right here. This is the even more concerning part, starting right here. Even worse, we found that the new firmware sometimes runs unsupported versions of RTOS that may have unknown vulnerabilities. This is extremely concerning, since assuming that the new firmware is not vulnerable might lead to serious blind spots in network risk assessments. As an example of this, CVE 2016-20009, which affects older version of VxWorks that are not officially supported anymore unless under a paid extended support program, even without having a CVE assigned before name rec, this issue was silently fixed. They go into and mention a practice that is unfortunately common among certain vendors in at least some devices, such as Huawei firewalls. The currently supported version of VxWorks are 6.9 and 7. However, versions of RTOS, such as old as 5.x, which was released more than 20 years ago, seems to be very popular. And that's what I pointed out in the showdown. Those versions of VxWorks that I showed on the screen here and here, these are not supported anymore, yet people still have them out there. And you're talking almost 6,000 devices. These will never be patched. These will never be fixed. And that's what I was pointing out when I pulled those up. There is supporting evidence that old versions of the OS are still used. For instance, according to results, again, more than 4,000 VxWorks and 1,500 VxWorks 5.51. There are several devices with newly released firmware based on old VxWorks, and this is even more concerning. We're talking about new devices that are put out by vendors that have the old firmware that's not supported. Huge, misstep here. These include Dell PowerConnect IT switches, which were probably next to Cisco the most widely used switches out there. Siemens Scalance ICS switches, and the Echelon 600 IP router for building automation. So, these are the things we're talking about. These are very popular products. They're in a lot of big companies. And the article goes on, and the report goes on to say that there are also other vulnerabilities affecting VxWorks back to 5.5. And this is unrelated to this TCP IP stack. This means that there's other vulnerabilities on these devices that exist that aren't patched and will never be patched, but people are still out there using them. So these, 6,000 or so devices that we pointed out that are out there, they can all be hacked right now. And really, they go on to say that we have not checked that any of these firmwares are vulnerable. In conversation with Wind River, they informed us that older versions may also be patched, but this depends on their customer having special support arrangements, which just all that means is that the companies have gone back to the vendor and said, look, there's a reason we can't get rid of this device. If we get rid of this device, it's going to break this, and we can't have that. So they go to the vendor and they ask for an extended support or a special support agreement where the vendor will support that device for a certain fee. I wouldn't say this is common, but it happens. Microsoft's been known to do this with companies when they say a certain operating system is out of support, and that company still needs support for that computer, and they really can't get rid of it because it's too mission critical and it's too costly to do anything with at the time, or they don't have the resources to make the investment to do the upgrade. And in certain cases, Microsoft will look at that and go, okay, yes, we will, for this fee, we will support this for you for another 5 years or whatever, what have you. So that's really it. I wanted to get this out to everybody so they kind of understood what the heck was going on and what could possibly be coming down the pike. I think we're going to hear a lot about this name wreck hack in the next probably couple of months. But this is a huge issue for the IT community. So if you're a business owner or you're somebody in charge of running an IT department and you are responsible for the IT at your company, this should be on your radar. This is something that you need to start planning for. You're going to have to start dedicating time, money, and resources to get these devices either replaced or updated so you do not get hacked. Yes, your IT team will have to invest time and money in learning what to do and how to do it. But from a business standpoint, this is going to be an expense that you're going to have to incur. If nobody is talking to you about this now, start planning for it and start getting ahead of the game and be proactive and get ready to understand that this is something you're going to have to deal with. If you don't know if you run these devices, you better have your IT team starting to figure it out. Forescout, the company that put out this research, does have a tool that you can download to look for this vulnerability on certain platforms. I would highly recommend that your IT team jump on that and understand that tool and start using it in your environment and start looking for these vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities aren't going to be easy to detect because there's a lot of different layers here. So your traditional tools might not pick this up, or especially if they don't have visibility. What I'm going to do, I'm going to wrap the video up for today, but what I'm going to do on my next video, which will probably drop in about a week, is I'm going to go through the things that your company should start doing from a hands-on standpoint to protect your company from these particular vulnerabilities. There's certain things that you can do without updating the firmware, which I'm going to go over with you, which are more around best practices around cybersecurity that you should be doing anyway. And we're actually covering these in our video series that we're dropping every Thursday for the next 20. We're doing it for 25 weeks. We're on video 4, so we got about 21 more weeks to go. And we do cover this. We actually covered it a little bit in the video that probably is going to drop this Thursday. I guess that would be the 15th of April. But we touched on it a little bit in last week's video too. So the video series is how to hack-proof your business. We go through everything that you need to do to start considering and putting in place a strong cybersecurity program. So it will educate you on everything you need to do to make sure your business is protected. And when things like this come out and there's vulnerabilities in 0 days, if you do the things I'm instructing you to do in these videos, things like this won't be such a big event when they do happen because you've done other things within your network or within your environment to mitigate if something like this were to come up and a particular device was going to become vulnerable and susceptible to hacking. There's other things you can do to make it harder. So once somebody does get on that device and does hack it and they have control of it, they can't just move to another device very easily. And that's the whole point of cybersecurity, is making things a little bit harder and making things, we call it mitigating risk, making it more difficult and making hackers just want to move on to an easier target because it just takes too much time and effort to break through the defenses you put up. So that's it in a nutshell. If you have any questions about this, drop them in the comments below. How do you feel about this? If you're an IT person, this has probably got to be very concerning to you because it's going to mean a lot of work in the future for you. Yes, it's job security, but we also know things like this can become very stressful. And as a business owner, what are you going to do to prepare for this? Drop them in the comments. And if you don't know, ask me a question. I'll help you out and I'll point you in the right direction. So that's it for me. Remember, hit the like button. Helps us out with YouTube and everyone else finding this content. And remember to subscribe to our channel. We really appreciate it, and it helps us put more content out like this. So I hope this was valuable and insightful, folks, and I look forward to bringing you the next video around this, which is how to protect your network from this stuff. But check out our video series, and we'll see you soon. Take care.